Good morning, and thanks for inviting us to come to speak about what has actually become our most favorite topic. It's obviously quite a dangerous topic, so we've come prepared. Sylvie's wearing a harness as well. We're both from Germany. Sylvia's done lots of work as an outdoor educator and as a high ropes trainer. My background is in play work, so I've worked a bit with the play bus in my earlier career. So risk-taking is kind of featured quite heavily in our professional contexts. We've gone sailing with children, we've let them use sharp tools from a young age, we've let them climb up trees, build a raft to basically drift down the stream, make fires and do things that, well, no adult was necessarily supervising. Nowadays we're working in Great Britain, training professionals who work with children in care. And risk plays a big role there as well, but in slightly different ways. Risk is often something that needs to be avoided, where professionals are quite keen on keeping children safe from experiencing any risks. And we've heard some great stories that are both hilarious and also true and also quite shocking in some respect. Stories about children who went on a fishing trip and had to be tied to a tree in order not to fall in the water, for example. This is true, I'm not making this up. Or stories from residential childcare workers who wanted to take a group of children to the beach on a sunny summer day, but had to A, comb the beach for any sharp items that might lie around, B, have a lifeguard certificate, C, ensure that the children would only go into the water up to their ankles, and D, often had to fill in so much paperwork that it would have taken them weeks to complete it all, so actually they never went to the beach. Paying you with similar stories for probably the rest of the day, but there's a wider point that we'd like to make. In the conversations with many practitioners and their senior managers, we've had to rethink where our own attitude towards risk comes from, what it means, and why actually the death toll in the activities that we've undertaken is not as high as the body count in an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie. Actually, some people are quite surprised that the children, given the risks we've allowed them to take, that the children actually survived, how we kept them alive at all. So we've had to reflect quite a bit on why they have survived and why we would argue that they've actually benefited from the experiences, from the adventures that we've allowed them to take. So today we'd like to share some of our own thoughts on the subject with you.
Okay, as you can see, there are loads of these pictures. You don't actually have to look much to find them, so there's a lot of restrictions to our lives actually. First of all, for health and safety reasons, we have to warn you. It is not entirely impossible that at some point over the next hours an airplane might crash into this very building and bury us all. Or that a fire will break out and engulf us, or that one of us suffers from an infectious disease. Could be, which we might contract by being in the same room with each other. That we might trip and fall down the stairs, or on the way home we'll get hit by a car when crossing the street. Given these risks and the near certainty of our death, if only one of these sceneries come true, are we stupid, irresponsible or brave for having come here today? Have we thought about all the risks that we're exposing ourselves to just being here in the room together? Perhaps not, and perhaps it is better that we didn't think about everything that could possibly go wrong and cut our previous life short, precious life short. We'd be paralyzed by fear, a raw bundle of nerves, like I am maybe at this moment now, and would be in some preoccupied with our anxieties and the possible dangers that we wouldn't have any chance to learn. So why don't we? Why aren't we, sorry. Okay, throughout this presentation we'd like to suggest that what helps us deal with risk on a day-to-day basis is what we've termed risk competency, and that as pedagogues we can play a key role in supporting children's risk competence. What we mean by this, in the sense, is the process of becoming knowledgeable and skilled in assessing risk and therefore acquiring the competence to take risks more safely. Children who have had opportunities to develop their physical abilities and motor skills, a good sense of balance and rhythm, and to experience their body limits, will be more risk competent in things like climbing a tree than children who have little or no sense of coordination, of gravity, of how much weight their arms will hold. This makes it not only unsafe to climb a tree, it affects the entire everyday life. Research shows that accidents are more likely to have serious consequences for those children who are not used to taking risks and develop risk competence than for those who have learned how to run without losing control, how to safely land when jumping, how to fall without hurting themselves, and so forth. That's why health insurances in Germany, for example, are actually pretty keen for children to be active and taking risks.
Our experiences shape us. The things we do, the adventures we undertake, the encounters with nature, with others, and with ourselves, they all have a profound impact on who we are, on what our inner world looks like. Whether it's colorful, full of dreams and fantasies, creative ideas, and thoughtful reflections, depends on what we've experienced in the outer world. So the risks that we take, the challenges we've overcome, enrich our inner world. They help us shape our identity. They give us a sense of mastery, of taking responsibility for our own actions, perhaps even for other people's actions. And they give us that thrilling feeling that we can control what happens to us, at least to an extent. So they are quite important. And where we fail, they can teach us that we can actually get it back up after we've fallen and learn from our mistakes. So why would we not take risks? Why leave such learning potential untapped? It is through these learning cycles, or let's say risk-taking cycles, in which we explore, experience, interpret, feel, and draw out the consequences and the learning, that we actually enable ourselves to cope with the things that everyday life throws at us. And this accounts equally for the practical and for the emotional aspects of the human being. Furthermore, every level of challenge that we have worked through in a productive and constructive way will help us to develop a stronger sense of security that we can cope with the challenges of life. It'll make us more confident that a new level of learning can be achieved should the next challenge arise. Having such awareness for our own ability to cope with the unknown and risk-underpinned challenges doesn't only give us a sense of mastery for a specific situation, it can also provide us with a long-term inner stability and feeds into our concept of self-efficacy.
Overcoming big challenges, or let's say situations that actually would be seen to pose an enormous risk to our positive development, can strengthen us emotionally by making us more resilient to new challenges. So not only do we develop risk assessment and coping mechanisms and coping skills, we also gain an inner perception and response to new risk that acts like a shield around us, that guides us in coping with new adverse circumstances. At this point, we should probably clarify that we are not advocating to take silly risk or expose children to dangers that they cannot yet understand. But we do contend that our society and many professionals working with children and young people have become too focused on risk per se, as if it were a category in itself. What do we mean by this? Let us just show you a picture that epitomizes risk, that shows its dangers. Okay, let's take a look. Can everyone see? There's this young person standing on a wooden plank, and in his hand he's got a saw. Ugh, what's he doing? That can only go wrong. He's going to hurt himself really badly. If we think of just the risk that boy is taking, well, it's bloody dangerous, and we'll probably feel like pulling him off the plank immediately. Now let's show us a new photo that encapsulates learning, that shows one of the greatest, most elemental learning experiences in the world. It's a different photo if you look at it from the learning point of view. So our perceptions matter. Whether we focus on risk as a category in itself or risk as an element of learning. And well-being is not just about semantics. It is about a particular understanding of our own role and the aim of our practice as pedagogues. To be clear, we need to think about risk, but not in isolation, not without thinking also about the potential benefits for children's development. In that sense, we have to be very conscious of how the experiences we construct with children could benefit them, what we hope they might learn if we take them on a camping trip or a kayaking, or let them use a sharp knife to whittle. In the outdoors, we facilitate these activities for good reasons, but unless we are clear on the fundamental importance of active play for children's learning and well-being, we or others are prone to see such activities as nothing more than a way of spending time. If we are conscious of the benefits of horseback riding, for example, how beneficial it can be in developing a sense of balance, of correct posture, in learning about gentle, assertive forms of exercising power and control, in developing a caring relationship with the horse, and so many other things, it becomes more than just a passing time activity that is a little bit more dangerous than going to the movies.
Using learning and well-being as the defining category rather than risk does not mean that we don't think about risk at all, but it means distinguishing between risks that can enhance children's well-being and those that don't. The Play Safety Forum in England has introduced the distinction between acceptable and unacceptable risks, which I think is quite helpful. So acceptable risks are beneficial, and they are the kinds of risks that children can perceive themselves. So for instance, that fire is hot. You can find that out pretty quickly, and that therefore I must treat it with caution. Unacceptable risks, on the other hand, fall into that category of requiring an understanding that children might not have got yet. So for example, that setting fire to a few dry leaves on the forest ground is kind of different than setting fire to a candle and can actually cause a huge wildfire. From a pedagogic point of view, this distinction is helpful for two reasons. First, it demands that we think of the individual rather than of the risk as such. We need to carefully weigh up if that particular child has the understanding needed to take a given risk without a genuine threat to his or her safety. Second, as developing risk competence is a long process of experiencing and reflecting, it's the pedagogue's task to provide children as early as possible with learning situations where they can take a risk, experience how that can be overcome. That means that we need to think about how to turn an unacceptable into an acceptable risk rather than avoiding unacceptable risks altogether. So we need to ask ourselves how this child could arrive at the understanding required to assess a particular risk competently.
Becoming risk competent is like a journey. It happens step by step. Children who have never climbed a tree before will generally not decide to climb to the top of the highest tree, but start to build up their climbing skills gradually. This is illustrated by the learning zone model, which was referred to earlier on by the other speaker, which Zeniger proposes. Learning is about leaving our comfort zone, where everything around us is familiar and already known, and entering our learning zone, but without overstepping into the panic, where fear prevents any learning from taking place. This is an innate process of gradually extending our comfort zone and our learning zone, and it is why we gradually intend to avoid situations where we feel we cannot master. In this sense, risk competence develops organically, where children are able to explore their learning zone, and it develops in a way that does not unnecessarily put children at risk of serious harm or death. The learning zone model also shows the connection between risk and development, where the environment does not facilitate learning situations which require a certain amount of trust in the unknown. Any further personal development of an individual is very limited. Being trusted to master risks and being successful in doing this encourages a person to approach the next level of challenge in a positive way, which helps increase their self-esteem and self-awareness. So how can we pedagogically support children in these processes?
If just for a moment we step back from all those potentially risky situations we've encountered during our own life and try to reflect on what our own responses in those situations were based on. Were they led through our own personal anxieties and own projections, maybe of things we have heard and read about? Were we making the other person fear something that actually we were afraid of? Was it us who were tired and at the end of a long day didn't want to risk an injury with maybe tears and a visit to the doctor? Through what were our thoughts and actions led? Is it often we ourselves who construct the risk through our interpretations of and sense towards challenges? And if we're talking about development and learning, and that includes our personal development as well, we always need to be reflective on what basis we are actually making the decision whether a risk is too risky or whether that situation is okay and we're happy to take that risk. Central to making risk-related decisions for children in our pedagogical practice is that we have a strong and well-developed relationship with the individual or the group of children. We can only judge what level of risk is appropriate at that point of time for that child if we have been able to create a trusting relationship with them, which gives us an insight into what level of risk competence they have already acquired and how they tend to behave in certain situations, whether they will get anxious and freeze up or whether they're generally quite daring and can actually master situations like that. Related to outdoor activities, this could, for example, be that a child is competent to climb up a 20-meter high pole, but is in a panic at the thought of having to come down again. So if we don't know the other person well enough, we will have to start with small steps, observe, explore their actions, talk to them, and thus gradually develop better sense of how they would cope with this risk or another.
Coming to the conclusions. So that's a signal for you that it's sort of the last episode of what we're going to say. We believe that it is really the key point. Whilst risk is all pervasive in our society, we must not simplify the complexity of ensuring children's well-being by becoming solely focused on risk and a short-term perspective on keeping children safe. Ulrich Beck, another leading psychologist, this is always my cracking point, sociologists, have proposed a notion of risk society, a society increasingly preoccupied with the future and also with safety, which generates the notion of risks, as Jidden explains. Within the risk society, there is no such thing as a risk-free reality, so perhaps we should not obsess too much about creating a world free of risk, even if we could. The risks we take are too important for our development, not only individually but also collectively. Think about where mankind would be if we'd never taken any risks. If we had avoided exposing ourselves to any kind of danger, we wouldn't have made it very far. We wouldn't have dared to explore new corners of the world around us or to innovate. We would have stayed in the tiny bubble of our comfort zone. The consequences of not taking a risk are not that we are safe, that we are averted danger. As Bex points out, risk only suggests what should not be done, not what should be done. To the extent that risk becomes an all-embracing background for perceiving the world. The alarm they provoke creates an atmosphere of powerless and paralyzes.
We must remember, this is the last thing we'll say, we must remember that we cannot make life risk-free, that whether an airplane crashes into this building or a virus breaches the invisible barriers of our immune system is somewhat beyond our control. We can only choose how we respond to risks, how we can control them instead of letting them control us. If we don't allow children to take risks, to explore how they can deal with the risks and the world around them on their own, then we are preventing them from acquiring an essential skill and we're limiting our collective resourcefulness. Risk society relies on us better understanding the many small and large, predictable and unpredictable, visible and invisible risks around us, and on our ability collectively to use this knowledge for our all safety. Enabling children to develop risk competence is therefore not just about their well-being, it also has potentially a profound impact on our society and the future. Through our work as pedagogues, we determine that future in no insignificant way. Thank you.
I don't understand Czech words, so don't worry.
And we're finished, actually, but thank you.